So thank you to everyone that has joined. I am so excited for today's webinar. We're going to hear from some really wonderful professionals to kind of set the foundation of what we'll be discussing today. We will be discussing setting ESG strategy specifically around identifying and prioritizing impact areas. So we'll set a foundational level of knowledge around the materiality assessment, which is how you prioritize and identify impact areas in ESG. And then our wonderful speakers will discuss how to take elements of the materiality assessment best practices to identifying and prioritizing impact areas in different fields, specifically in the B Corp assessment, in CSR, and then Brendan will also discuss aligning materiality assessment strategy or ESG strategy with business strategy. Okay, here's an agenda for today. So like I discussed, we'll have some brief intros with our speakers. Then I will go through the materiality assessment steps and best practices just to form kind of foundational understanding of what it is. Brendan will discuss developing sustainability strategies and aligning them with your business strategy. Jenny will discuss identifying and prioritizing impact areas as it pertains to the B Corp assessment and certification process. And then Grace will discuss incorporating ESG elements or prioritizing impact areas into CSR, which is really interesting as well. We'll have the Q&A session at the end. So if you have questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat whenever, and we'll make sure to include them in the last 15 minutes of the session. I'll also probably be staying on late if you have any burning questions that we didn't have a chance to address. So let's start off with some intros. My name is Shelby. I am the lead consultant at Actera Consulting. We help high growth companies develop and launch social impact and ESG programs, and I will be discussing kind of an overview, steps and best practices on how to conduct a materiality assessment. We can just go in the order of the speakers. So Brendan, if you want to go next.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Brendan Kitt. I own a consulting firm called Compago Group. We focus on helping companies, nonprofits, foundations develop really innovative social impact strategies revolved around sustainability. So what I'm going to be talking about mostly today is kind of the process that I use with clients to kind of help develop those sustainability strategies post ESG materiality assessment.
And my name is Jenny Morgan. I am Market Development Manager at Tradewater. We are a event services project development organization. So we destroy non-CO2 gases, so greenhouse gases that are traditionally developed by human beings. And I also own a consulting company called Pact 3, where we help organizations go through the B impact assessment. If you're looking to just see where you stand as where your impact levels are for social and environmental impact, and if you're looking to achieve the B Corp certification. I'll be going through the information of what it means to become a B Corp certified organization and what purposeful profiteering looks like as a company.
I'm Grace Randazzo. I'm the Corporate Social Responsibility Manager at Empower. I'll be talking a little bit about how we can take the things that Brendan and Jenny show us through ESG and materiality and the B Corp assessment and apply them in practical ways to your CSR program.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. So I will get us going with an overview of the materiality assessment. So I'll mostly be talking through the steps and best practices, as I know many of you all already work in CSR and ESG, so you're kind of already familiar with why you should do a materiality assessment and what it is. But of course, I'll kick it off with the value of investing in the process, because it is quite a process. So a materiality assessment is the formal process of deciding of all of the ESG issues out there in the universe that could potentially impact your company or that your company impacts, which are the ones that meet that threshold of being important and relevant or material enough for your company to address and include in your ESG reporting strategy. So depending on your ESG goals and priorities, the materiality assessment will look slightly different. However, a big part of the process, regardless, is identifying stakeholder groups. So people that are impacted by your company's activities and operations. That could be community members, employees, investors, et cetera, and engaging those stakeholders to identify the extent to which your company's ESG performance impacts them. The materiality assessment is quite a process. So according to the conference board, it takes companies on average 31 working days and 3 months to be able to complete one materiality assessment. That being said, it is crucial to complete an assessment to ensure that your company's ESG program is focusing on the right topics to ensure that your company's meets its goals. Like with any project planning process, step one is identifying, okay, are we focused on the right things? And that's basically what a materiality assessment will do for you. Depending on your goals, again, a materiality assessment will help you meet stakeholder expectations, uncover social and environmental risks and opportunities that are out there, how they could potentially impact your company's bottom line, and then finally identifying hotspots in the value chain where your company is either having a negative impact or could be having a negative impact, so you can manage that most effectively. Depending on who you talk to, there are 6 basic steps in the materiality assessment process, and I'll go through them today. So the first step in the process is to really have a thorough and straightforward discussion with your team members to align on and really be clear about what your ESG perspective is. So as I mentioned, your materiality assessment is a tool to ensure the success of your ESG program. So how valuable it is depends on how clear you are about the goals at the outset. So when you come to ESG perspectives, there are 2 basic ways of defining materiality or the extent to which an issue is important for your company. The first perspective is the business case or outside-in perspective. In the business case perspective, your company is primarily focused on identifying social and environmental risks and opportunities that are out there and defining the extent to which they could impact your company's ability to create value. Conversely, on the societal impact side, if your company has this perspective, you're primarily focused on managing your performance on external environmental and societal issues or the environment, society, and economy around your company, and making sure that you're reducing the negative and amplifying the positive impacts that your company can have. In between those 2 perspectives is double materiality. So it will sometimes, but not always, be the case that an issue is really important for society and is also important for your company. So this is especially relevant when you're talking about issues that are under regulation. For example, climate change is a huge issue that it's going to be important for your company, and it's going to be really important for society. Human rights issues in the value chain is another example of this. But I really encourage companies to be really rigorous in their thinking and don't rely on just focusing on issues that are doubly material, because as we know, corporate interests, societal interests, they do not always align. So you have to be really clear about what you're going to do when there's some gray area there. The second step is defining a wide range of topics that you are going to get stakeholders' feedback on about including in your ESG strategy and reports. So this is great to do really early in the process because you'll develop a really foundational knowledge of your company's sustainability context. Some resources that you can refer to develop this list include the different standards and frameworks out there. So the GRI, the SASB, CDP, and TCFD are great places to start. Many of the frameworks provide guidance per industry, so you can look at your industry's guidance. Looking at what your competitors or what your business peers are reporting on is a really helpful tool. And then also looking at internal data. So what are your employees? What are your leadership members, board members, investors, et cetera, customers, business partners? What have they been saying about the impact areas or the ESG issues that are important to them? So number 3, after you've developed this exhaustive list of potential ESG issues that your company either impacts or is impacted by, you will select your information sources. So part of that is identifying the stakeholder groups you're going to reach out to and get insights from. You can refer to internal stakeholders to get insight on the extent to which ESG issues will create or reduce business value. So folks like customers, investors, and employees. And then you can reach out to external stakeholders to identify issues that your company is having an impact on. So external stakeholders will help you determine the extent to which your company's performance on ESG is impacting the world around you. So this could be folks like community members. Many companies also have the planet or future generations as external stakeholders. And then once you have those stakeholder groups, you'll figure out how you'll reach out to them. If it's an internal stakeholder, you can just go ahead and interview them, send them a survey, or conduct focus groups. Those are primary information sources. Especially when it comes to external stakeholders, you're going to want to use more secondary info sources. For example, reports, things that you're seeing in the media, or dialogue that you're having with folks throughout the year. How can you engage that in the materiality assessment process? Okay, so now that you have the list of ESG topics that you're going to get folks feedback on and the stakeholders that you're going to engage, you can go out and collect your ESG data. So when engaging with stakeholder groups, it's really important to use clear language so folks know how to respond. Also be cognizant of things like recency bias. So if a given ESG topic has been connected with your company in the past, or if folks are seeing it in the news, then they might respond more strongly to that specific issue. So just be cognizant of that. Once you collect the data, you'll want to provide quantitative scores for each ESG issue for each specific stakeholder group. And then once you have those quantitative scores, you may want to weigh the scores according to the different stakeholder groups that might be more or less important according to your strategy. And basically the last step in the materiality assessment process is prioritizing your topics or impact issues, and then identifying which ones you're actually going to focus on this year. So you've probably all seen these materiality matrices that companies like to share in their impact reports. It's basically a way to share the final outcome of the materiality assessment process. So basically the company will plot on a grid the impact topics according to 2 opposed dynamics in ESG. So 2 of these dynamics that folks can kind of rate the impact issues on include things like impact on society and the environment, or importance to business value. I also think it's really helpful when companies show the difference between what external stakeholders think is important as it pertains to ESG, and then what internal stakeholders think it's important. So I wanted to feature a few issues that I sometimes see companies make, or some challenges that companies have when it comes to materiality assessments and matrices. So these issues sometimes show up with the materiality matrix. However, they're kind of endemic to the whole issue, to the whole process. So I'll go through them really quickly because I'm sensitive that I'm taking up a little bit too much time today. But if you have any ideas or feedback around these common challenges, I would so love it if you dropped your perspective in the chat. So issue one that I sometimes see companies being challenged by is kind of conflating or lumping together various stakeholder perspectives and not defining who the stakeholders were and how they were engaged, and then how they were also weighted if necessary. So as we've already discussed, different types of stakeholders can have really different perspectives on the same issue. So imagine like what investors would think about a given issue versus what communities might think about a given issue. They could be diametrically opposed. So I like to encourage companies to at least provide like external stakeholder importance or internal stakeholder importance. That gives me a little bit more context about what their materiality matrix is telling me and what they're including in their ESG strategy. The second issue that I sometimes see companies have is that you see a materiality matrix and you see all of the ESG issues lining up in a diagonal line that goes up and to the right. So this is kind of the company saying, yes, what's important to our business is equally important to the society. And I really encourage companies to be really clear and like really rigorous when it comes to this process, because business interest and societal interest is not always going to align. And I think it's important to be super transparent and honest around these processes and how you are delineating and also prioritizing any tension that might come between business importance versus societal importance, especially since now ESG methodology and strategy is becoming so much more important. It's being more regulated, and it's also under a lot more regulatory scrutiny. I think it's important to be very like scientific in your methodology and your decision making. And then the third issue is not setting thresholds in advance. So at the end of your materiality assessment process, the goal is to be able to say, yes, here in the top right of our matrix are the issues that we're going to include in our ESG strategy. And these ones are important, but we're not going to include them this year. So if you don't set those thresholds in advance, there could be the perception that, decisions are being made in some closed door, smoke-filled room around what is actually most convenient for the company to include in its ESG strategy and reports. Not that that's necessarily the case, but it does create an added sense of transparency and authenticity if you do share those thresholds in advance. And then the final step in the materiality assessment process is basically to repeat the process. So materiality assessments are not one and done. You're going to want to repeat it every 1 to 3 years. However, it doesn't have to be equally rigorous every single year. If you do it every year, you can have off years where it's just a quick update with stakeholders and then do a more rigorous assessment on the other years. Assessments are typically timed in alignment with strategic planning. And then finally, something I wanted to feature is that ESG is such an exciting and burgeoning field. There's so many new methodologies and technologies that are out there. So it's important to be aware of the tension between using new methodologies and all these dynamic topics that are coming up in ESG versus using the same methodologies each and every year and collecting longitudinal data so that you can understand how trends change over time. Okay, and that is it from me. Thank you all so much. I will stop sharing my screen. So as a reminder, we're doing Q&A after the session. And now I will hand it over to my colleague, Brendan. So take it away, Brendan.
Thanks, Shelby. Let me share my screen really quick. I really appreciate that really thorough breakdown of the materiality assessment. I've been working on creating social impact strategies, sustainability strategies for companies for over 10 years now. And I remember when I first started, figuring out where to start was always like one of the most difficult things for the company. So it's been really cool to see materiality assessments become such a core process that you can lean on. But one difficulty that I've always seen is one of the challenges can be if you do your materiality assessment, you have, a set of metrics now that you're focused on measuring, and then you don't really put any strategy behind how you actually start pushing the needle forward on those metrics. You end up just measuring those same things over time and not really making any progress. But there's some really good business cases in terms of why you should be pushing forward the needle on those metrics that you identify in the materiality assessment as priorities. So two things, you can really identify big opportunities for your business for value creation. There's going to be opportunities for revenue growth within the materiality assessment, new products and services that you can potentially provide for customers. There's definitely going to be cost reduction potential. So, saving money on energy, utilities, reducing waste. And there's increased productivity opportunities as well with your employees, having better governance structures, having better employee retention programs. All those things are very, very important and can provide a lot of opportunities for your business. In addition to that, you can really start looking at risk management too for the future. So becoming more aware of regulations that could potentially come down the line, being able to avoid, hefty legal processes because of those regulations. And then being very active about considering the sustainability risks that might be associated with different asset management or investment management that you'll be making in the future. So because of this, I think that's why these two things merge really well, things like your ESG data and creating an overall business strategy. Now, one issue that I usually have with clients is, okay, you go through the materiality assessment like Shelby provided, and now what? Where do we go from there? How do we start working on these things? And from what I've seen, there's kind of a natural progression of companies in terms of their ESG journey. First is always starting with performing a materiality assessment. So, let's figure out what our priorities are and let's set our baseline like Shelby talked about. The second really key thing is once you have those priorities in mind and you understand what you're going to be focusing on, you should really work on developing really deep knowledge from that data collection that you're doing on those ESG priorities. So, say your water usage comes up as a big priority that you want to work on. Why is that the case? Like what's happening in your operation that's causing a lot of water usage? Is there specific things in your industry? Are you in line with where your competitors are? Are you behind them? Are you in front of them? All these things take time to kind of develop as you dig into the data to really understand deeper into what those ESG priorities are. The third stage that a lot of companies go into is they start creating sustainability strategies. So once we have a really deep understanding, now we can start thinking about strategies to start tackling those individual metrics and pushing the needle forward on that. And then the fourth stage is creating sustainable business strategies. Now, it kind of sounds the same, but it's a little bit different. And this fourth stage is when sustainability becomes part of your DNA as a company. You actually start developing products and services that are specifically designed around doing good. And Jenny's going to talk a little bit more about that in the next section when it comes to the B Corp assessment. So I thought what would be helpful for everybody is to kind of go through an overview of a quick workshop that I do with a lot of my clients when we want to start discussing or thinking about sustainability strategies. So I'll use an example that I did recently. I was working with a produce distributor here in Chicago. One of the key things that came out of their ESG materiality assessment was they were having a lot of food waste. And so they wanted to formulate a strategy to start thinking about how to tackle that. So the first thing that we did was we brought multiple stakeholders from within the organization and brought them into a brainstorming scenario. And we said, okay, what could we do as an organization to reduce our food waste? And they came up with several different avenues that they could do. They talked about, can we donate the food? Can we reduce our purchasing of the food? Can we compost it? Do we have different sales avenues that we can go down? And we formulated a bunch of different strategies that we could do to actually push the needle forward on those initiatives. The second step that we do is what we call setting the burden of proof. So we have maybe 3 or 4 strategies at this point that we think about we want to move forward with. Now we got to decide which one is the right one to do. So what we ask is, okay, what needs to be true about the world for this strategy to be a good fit? So for example, when we were looking at donating food, we said, okay, in order for this to be true, we need to be able to find a nonprofit partner that'd be able to take that amount of food on this amount of basis, on these number of days. And if that's not true, then this isn't a good strategy for us. After we set the burden of proof for each of those different strategies, then we conduct implied analysis to try to figure out if those strategies are true. So we actually go out and we run tests to see if those actually fit. As you can see in this third, hopefully one of them really fits into the real world, and that should emerge as your key strategy that you use to kind of move forward. Now, just a few keys to success that I've seen going through this activity. First is you really want to give ideas room to breathe in the beginning. So that first stage and the second stage are really about being creative and thinking outside the box. A really good business strategy should get you a competitive advantage in the marketplace, which means that you have to be creative and you have to think about something different than what you're doing now and something different than what your competitors are doing. So you really want to leave room for creativity. That's not the time to start cutting ideas down. The second is you always want to consider your organizational fit when determining whether or not a strategy is good for you. So I often talk about 3 different types of fit for a strategy. You want to think about your internal fit. So what capabilities do you have? What people do you have in place? What's your current product offering? Those are all internal fits. Does the strategy fit within your internal organization? Then you want to think about your external fits. You want to think about your competitor landscape. You want to think about your customer base. You want to think about potential regulations that exist right now. Does your strategy fit within that external operating environment as well? And then you want to merge those 2 things together and think about your dynamic fit. So over time, does that still make sense? Does the strategy make sense in 5 years? Is there some regulation coming down the line that could actually make it obsolete for you to have to do this in the first place? So you always want to consider all those different fits when you're determining what strategy to go with. And then the third is to have the right people at the table. So, same as in the materiality assessment, this shouldn't be like a strictly top-down approach. This shouldn't be a single person in your organization doing this. You really want to bring everybody to the table that could be potentially impacted by these strategies and that are going to have to directly manage them or move them forward. And that's really key, to have that buy-in, to have them, involved in the ideation stage up front, and to have them buy in as you go through this process of determining whether or not it's a good strategy. It's the easiest way to get everybody in your table or everybody in your organization involved and bought into the strategy. So I hope that's helpful. Like I said, there's a really easy kind of workshop blueprint that you can use to kind of help your strategies early on as you're starting to develop your ESG programming. So I will push it over to Jenny to talk about the B Corp assessment.
Thank you so much. I'm going to be talking about the B impact assessment to get your B Corp certification, building on the topics that we've gone through of basically taking data and building a strategy around it that's holistic and also prioritizes stakeholders over shareholders. So it's all about being purposeful while you are growing profit. And to just bring it back a bit, before, when consumers were going out and looking for products and services that they wanted, they could see these labels, and this would be the way that they would identify good products, something that they could trust. This label has made them feel confident in what they're purchasing. Now you have this label of the B Corp certification, and now you're knowing that not only is this a good product or good service, but now you know that it's a good company behind it, that they're looking at all of their stakeholders and they're acting as a force of good in a profitable space. So what is a B Corp? It's basically a community for for-profit organizations to go through a very rigorous assessment and standards through a third-party entity. That's always good because it's not them saying, hi, I am this, I am the best. It's actually being determined by a third-party entity. And basically looking at a holistic review of their social and environmental performance, how they hold themselves accountable, and ensuring that they're transparent along the way. It's lacking what everything else is lacking, which is basically that sense of proof. So you're going to go through the entire company, and there's 5 different pillars: worker engagement, community involvement, environmental footprint, governance, and how they're having their relationships with their customers and holding those accountable. You can see at the bottom here that the community is rapidly growing. It covers an enormous amount of industries and impacts so many different workers. One of the things that's been really resonating with me recently is this quote, and it's basically talking about how a company needs to be profitable. That is a requirement for them to be able to stay in this growth and this mechanism that they're hoping to, continue to scale and hire more and have a footprint. But if it's only about profit, then they're going to be missing so many more opportunities to create impact. And so this quote here really resonates with me, because it's so easy to get very siloed and kind of tunnel vision about I need profit. But then if your only reason for living is just to breathe, then you've missed out on really good movies and time with friends and family. So as I mentioned, there are these different 5 pillars, and I can give some examples of some sample questions, but basically you're going through this assessment. It's a 2-hour assessment that's on an average based on just what typical companies are experiencing, but it can go up and down depending on the complexity of your business. And for governance, it could be what portion of your management is evaluated in writing on their performance. Workers, what percentage of the company is owned by full-time workers, excluding founders and executives. And so you're going through this list of answering questions. It's a lot of yes or no or percentages. Very simple to go through, but it's long and extensive, and you're able to just really add, your what is relevant to your business today, and then you'll gain some insight on what's available tomorrow. So once you're done with the entire assessment, and there's a little quick video showing here, but you can improve your impact. You can see your score. You have to receive a score of 80 to become B Corp certified. That's then audited by B Lab, the third-party entity. But you're basically going to be able to go through this and see where you landed in each pillar. What does your score compare? How does your score compare to others in the industry? And you'll be able to put together a comprehensive plan on what you're going to do next. Are you going to be changing your mission statement and doing some things on your website to communicate your values? A little bit of an easier thing to do, or are you going to completely change the benefit structure for your employees, which would take a bit more time? So you can prioritize based on where your business is, on what you want to focus on now and what you want to focus on tomorrow. So that's where a consultant can be helpful if you're looking for that project management skill set, as well as helping you go through the process of that audit. As I mentioned, I also work full-time for a company called Tradewater. We just became B Corp certified. I feel like I'm living this amazing experience right now that I'm trying to remember of being a B Corp consultant, and I'm also working full-time at a B Corp. So, but as you can see, there's goals that we now have. Even though we've passed, our goal is to keep having goals. So even just the leaders of the B Corp movement, like Patagonia and Ben & Jerry's, they haven't passed. They don't get a 200 and then they stop. It's always looking to achieve more and be better. So we won't stop until all businesses are a force for good and able to really, drive impact within the private sector. And passing to Grace.
Oh, I didn't unmute myself, did I? Oh, I did. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Jenny. So like I said, I'm Grace. I'm more on the action of the CSR part of ESG. CSR can be a really big part of ESG. It's how you put everything that you've learned into practice. So, materiality assessments and the B Corp assessment are really, really important and powerful tools. And CSR really stems from those tools and the insights that you gain from them. And before I start, I want to say everything that we're talking about today and materiality assessments, B Corp assessments, is that they can be done for any program, whether it's new or established. No matter where your program stands, there's always an opportunity to bring materiality and a fresh perspective to the table. So if you're sitting here and saying, we don't have a CSR program, or I'm working with the CSR program that's been established for 20 years. Any and everything that I'm talking about can still be applied to your program, as well as with what Brendan and Jenny talked about. There's no certain time that you have to engage in these sorts of activities. So putting this materiality into practice really begins with deciding your program's focus and priorities. Because of the work that you already do with materiality assessments, you know who your stakeholders are, what issues are really important to them, and how important each of those issues are. And hopefully, as I talk, some of the things that you've seen already today are kind of popping into your head, and you're saying, oh, I get it, and it's snapping into place. But when it comes to CSR, this Venn diagram really shows the 3 key stakeholder groups that we often see arising in CSR programs. So we have company priorities, community needs. So those are really the 3 most common. And ideally, we'd like to hit that middle point, but we often see that employee interests and company priorities are separate, and they can be approached separately in our program. Ideally, we would like to have everything, company, employee, and community all aligned. We can do one thing to meet all of those groups' needs, but in reality, that's often not the case. It's really important, I think, to pull out employees because their day-to-day engagement, their retention, and their satisfaction can really determine the direction of the company and the success of any of the work that you put into your CSR program. We also know that company priorities, of course, really important. Brand, public image, and trust all play into how external stakeholders engage with your company and how successful your company will be. And I always like to include communities as the 3rd largest main stakeholder. It really ensures that your CSR program is authentic and it's making a true impact. And those are 2 really important things that people are looking for when they're looking for jobs at companies, when they're looking to invest, when they're looking for a company to support. We're in an evolving place in time, and we've seen that people aren't going to stand for greenwashing. They're not going to stand for whitewashing. The authenticity of your CSR program has a really big impact on all of these facets. So now that we've learned what has come out of our materiality assessments, it's time to decide what priorities you're focusing on. This is where you decide the elements that can comprise your CSR program. Corporate grants, volunteering, matching gifts, etc. Whatever makes the most sense to address what your stakeholders need and want. And, a corporate grants program might meet all 3 of these, while a matching gift program is really great for all 3 as well, but really strong in brand. It really empowers your employees. So there are ways that you can build your CSR program to have points that touch each of these stakeholders. But before we can start volunteering and giving and reporting, it's really, really important to put a really solid foundation down. What are your policies? What sort of processes need to be put into place? Who are your internal champions? What's your communication strategy internally? And how does marketing get brought into the conversation? I think these are some of the things that, by thinking about and putting into place early, they can make your CSR program a lot more effective and efficient. They seem really obvious, but a reminder never hurts. And the same goes for goals and metrics. We need to be able to measure the success of a program, and setting high-level goals and measurements will keep you going in the right direction. This is also a really important chance to get input from your team or important internal stakeholders to increase buy-in, garner support, and provide transparency. When people are engaged in the creation of something, they have a stronger sense of ownership and involvement. And that can often be what makes or breaks a CSR program or initiative. And so once you've done your materiality assessment and decide the structure and levers that you're going to pull for your program to make community impact and reach your stakeholders, it's time to put those plans in action. So you've identified those levers and it's time to pull them. I'm going to go into that. I think that's the action piece. That's the really fun part of CSR is, putting all these plans into place and seeing the fruits of your labor and the impact that you have on your community. And the biggest thing I would say is assessing and evolving. So I think Jenny has kind of touched on this. I think we've all sort of touched on this, as your program grows, it's important to continually assess its success and the elements it has to ensure they continue to meet the needs of the stakeholders. Our world is always changing and our programs are kind of a living thing. So to really put a fine point on it, corporate social responsibility is about evolution. And while many of us come to this space with big ideas and even bigger passions, we're often here to steward a journey to better. We might never reach that perfect state. Jenny mentioned that B Corp certification and assessment is all about that evolution and constant improvement. And in many ways, so are corporate social responsibility programs. So materiality can provide a really strong and relevant guiding star for your CSR program. And I'll turn it back over to Shelby, but I hope each of you come away with something actionable.
Haha, thank you so much, Grace. That was amazing. So now we'll go to the Q&A session. So we technically have 3 minutes left because I made the mistake of setting this webinar to be 45 minutes. However, I'm happy to stay on. Probably our speakers are okay with staying on after the 45 minutes if you all have any burning questions. So I have some questions to kick us off. I'll give you all 30 seconds to decide if you have a question. You can also unmute yourself since we're a pretty intimate group. I think that would be awesome as well. Okay, so I have a question for Jenny. I am really curious about examples about companies that you've worked with and prioritizing impact areas on the B Corp assessment. You talked about how companies would prioritize impact areas depending on basically how integral the impact area was to their business and like where they are in terms of sustainability, sophistication. But I would love for you to just provide a little context around that and any examples if you have them.
Yeah, it really depends on, once you've gone through the impact assessment, you can see where your scores are and you can see which bucket you're scoring higher than others. You can compare that to yourself or to your industry, however you want to kind of put goals in place. But then I would be talking to a potential client about what their goals are and what's coming up. So I did have a client that had a large growth opportunity that was coming up. And so we really focused an enormous amount of time on improving their employee score and how they engage their workers. And that could mean that they are integrating professional development, reassessing their benefits portfolio, just different things, including employees in the decision making for the business, a 360 feedback, so allowing for feedback for employees and for employees to give feedback to their managers, to the organization as a whole. So based on where they were in their business, we targeted that specific pillar more than we did for their environmental footprint, for instance. But if you do the assessment, you may also want to get a few wins under your belt. So there are some things that you can do that don't cost money, that don't take a significant portion of time, and can really start building up your confidence in implementing these impacts and focus areas into all of these different pillars. So it's really being knowledgeable about where you are as a business, what you're capable of doing today versus tomorrow, and what your goals are as a business and how you can integrate, impact into what's next for you.
Thank you so much, Jenny. That's really interesting. And it aligns with something I've been learning about a lot lately, which is the intersection between ESG and social impact, and also change management best practices. So a few things that you've hit on really align with change management best practices. For example, early wins to kind of ensure that your program is gaining momentum and people can see that you're having an impact, as well as once you've achieved success, you've achieved a certain milestone, ensuring that you're not being complacent, you're continuing to set more and more ambitious targets, or else you can actually go backwards in terms of achieving momentum. So we're at 1:45. So thank you all so much for joining this webinar. I really appreciate it. Thank you to our speakers and everyone that joined. We'll be sending a takeaway document with the recording and slides and more resources as well. So keep an eye out for that. And thanks again. Bye.
Thanks, Shelby. Thanks, everyone.